behind. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks. I guess Carol will be back. Hey, good evening, everybody. All right. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Morristown Township Board of Education. This meeting is called in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act, with adequate notice provided as follows in the Courier Post on July 1, 2022, and the Burlington County Times on July 1, 2022. We're going to start off. I'd like to ask for a moment of silence, and during this moment, I'd like to mention we have a staff member here at the district, Yolanda Presco, has, sorry, just want to make sure I pronounce her name properly. Yolanda's father passed over the weekend, so our thoughts and condolences are going out to her and her family in this difficult time. So moment of silence, please. Thank you, everyone. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Mr. Heiser, could you please do the roll call?
Dr. Alberti.
Here.
Mrs. Arcaro Burns.
Present.
Mrs. Fallis Macaluso.
Here.
Mrs. Makopoulos.
Here.
Mrs. Morano.
Here.
Mr. Romano.
Here.
Mr. Villanueva.
Here.
Dr. Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Weeks.
Present.
Thank you.
Mr. Heiser. So the board has already had executive session and returned from that. We will move on to, let's see, routine matters. First, we'll start off with the approval of the minutes from previous meetings, the September 20th executive session and regular meeting, and September 24th special meeting, which was our board retreat. I'll entertain a motion for approval of those minutes. Thank you. All in favor? I'm sorry, any abstentions or comments? Okay. All in favor? I'll try again.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thanks very much. Are there any, at this point, any communications to share with the board? No. Hearing none, we'll move on to the president's remarks. Those who are connoisseurs of my remarks will should take note tonight. I will be very brief. We have a lot to get to in this meeting, so I will just say, going back, talking about the special meeting, we had our board retreat back on September 24th. It was a Saturday morning. We had that over in the Star Center at the high school. was a really great opportunity for the board to get together and discuss plans and talk about priorities. Among them were the focuses were safety and security for our students, both physical and emotional, their well-being, student achievement, and then also inclusion. So felt really good about how the board was able to come together along with administration and have good conversation about that. Tonight, you're going to hear a little bit more about our progress academically from Dr. Benton. And, when you hear that information, we're just know, I think as a board, we're still encouraged that, we have good plans and things are moving in the right direction. And so we're excited about that. So like I said, I will be brief tonight. So I will turn it over to Mr. Volpe. Oh, sure. Okay. Yes, right. Because we have all the other things. So, all right. Why don't we do that? So student board representatives, why don't we have you guys go? And I guess we're going in order of seniority. All right. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Lucas Miguel. Today I have some information to share with you regarding Spirit Week. As usual, we have our themed days, which start on Monday, Halloween, and go as follows. Monster Mash Monday. Since it's Halloween, we encourage students to wear appropriate Halloween costumes to classes. Then we have a fan favorite, Team Tuesday, where students can wear jerseys or apparel from their favorite sports teams. A new addition, Wild West Wednesday, will encourage students to dress like cowboys, flannels, boots, jeans, etc. Tropical Thursday is exactly how it sounds. Hawaiian shirts and lays for everybody. And to top it all off, we'll be wearing our class shirts on Friday, and we'll finish the day with our pep rally competitions. The next day, Saturday, we'll be having our homecoming parade. We'll meet at Memorial Field at 5:15, go down Main Street and make our way to the high school in time for the dance, which will be later that night. It is luau themed from 7 to 9 in the MAC gym. We're all very excited for what the week has to offer, and I'll let you all know how it went at the next meeting. Now I'm going to hand it off to our junior class liaison.
Thank you, Mr. McGill.
Hi, everybody. I'm the junior class liaison, Bhavika. It's really nice to see you all after break. I'm honored to be here for my third year of meetings and looking forward to making it a good one. Anyways, I'm here to talk about our Veterans Day Assembly. Our assembly will be held on November 15th. Just because of the way the Teachers Convention Week lands, we have to have it a bit after the actual Veterans Day. So to talk a little bit about what we do during our assembly, we invite veterans who are a mix of Morristown alumni and relatives of Morristown High School staff. So we have a couple student council officers posted outside of the main entrance to invite the veterans in, and it's overall a very welcoming scene. We have our sidewalks decorated with American flags just to invite them and let our veterans know that we appreciate them. During our assembly, we feature speeches from student council officers where we list the names of past Morristown alumni who have been veterans / who are veterans. We also had a keynote speech last year from Colonel Pawlikowski, Father Matthew. He gave a very insightful speech, so we're looking forward to having something similar to that this year. We also feature speeches from the presidents of each grade who give their thoughts on Veterans Day and speak to the student body about honoring this day and remembering our veterans. Following the assembly, we escort the veterans to the Star Center we were in the MAC gymnasium this year for our assembly. Last year it was in the auditorium, but this year we'll be in the MAC. So we escort them from the MAC to the Star Center for refreshments. And once again, just to let them know that we are thinking about them and we would like to thank them for their service. In the past or last year, it was virtual. So our assembly had to be broadcasted to the student body who watched the assembly in their homerooms. This year, we are looking forward to it being in person, which I'm very excited for. Last year, it was also broadcasted, meaning that the link was sent out to parents, staff. So we are looking forward to doing that again this year, possibly. But if that is done, the student council and I strongly encourage everyone here, parents, members, staff to watch it because it is really a rewarding experience to hold the assembly. And in past years, it has been a success and we are looking for another success of a Veterans Day Assembly this year. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone. I'll pass it on to our sophomore liaison, Amin.
Thank you, Pavika.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back here again and get to see all of you. Just as a reminder, my name is Amin Kazmi and I'm the sophomore class board liaison. Now, a big event we have coming up in the high school is the Thanksgiving food drive. During the course of this event, each grade has their own designated food item that they will bring in over the course of a week, and it will be collected in big bins in the front. And then at the end, we will be giving these food items to the families in Morristown in little Thanksgiving baskets. We've been doing it every year, and it's been success after success. The freshmen will be bringing in mashed potatoes, the sophomores will be bringing in stuffing, the juniors vegetables, and the seniors cranberry sauce. And that's basically the update you need to know for Thanksgiving food drive. Thanks you for listening, and I'm going to pass it to Dom, the freshman class liaison.
Thank you, Mr. Cosby.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Dom Gorman, freshman class liaison. And I said last time, school year is flying by. We're only a month in. We are already getting into the swing of things like classes, sports, and different activities. All the incoming freshmen are really getting comfortable in the new school and are doing great in a new environment and are looking forward to upcoming activities. Just like that, homecoming and Spirit Week are just around the corner. The rest of student council and I are breaking up into our Spirit Week committees, just like the homecoming dance group, pep rally group, parade group, competitions group, the decorations group, and that's it. All of which are working hard and together to make sure the students have a great experience during this week. Overall, we are all working hard and looking forward to Spirit Week and homecoming all together. Thank you and have a great evening.
Great. Thanks very much. Thank you all for that insight into how things are going at your respective classes at the high school. So at this point, this is where we invite you to stay or go ahead and handle any of the other obligations that you have. So if that's homework or catching up on your rest. Thank you all. Okay, now we'll go back to Mr. Volpe for his remarks and then also our
Sure.
presentations.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just knew we had a couple presentations, so I want to get our students on their way. They're always welcome to stay, but if they wanted to go, I wanted to have that option. My superintendent's report tonight will be very brief, as we have two other members of our administrative team who will be updating the public about matters related to harassment, intimidation, and bullying, as well as our annual State of the District presentation. Tonight, I want to make the public aware of a few specific things. First, as a part of my safety and security presentation this summer, I spoke about the Stop It app, where students or parents will have the ability to anonymously report threats through the app to the administration. In off hours, such reports will go to the staff at Stop It, who will either then make a recommendation to refer to law enforcement or to administration when they are available, depending on the severity of the event or the threat. Originally, I had planned for this to be operational by October. However, in order to make sure that we are most effectively preparing for the use of the app, our go live date has been pushed back to November 18th. Hopefully you have started to receive some communication from your schools about the use of this app. And if not, please know that you will be receiving such communications over the course of next month. Just wanted to make you aware of that date change. Additionally, at that same summer presentation, I had mentioned that we will be collaborating with Rutgers University and participating in a survey relative to school climate, as we acknowledge that psychological safety is just as important as physical safety and well-being. Students in grades 3 to 12, parents and staff would have the option to participate in the survey, the results of which will be shared with anti-bullying specialists and school climate teams in order to help them make informed decisions as to how to create optimal and inclusive environments for all. This survey is completely voluntary, and I'm going to be asking that parents opt in order for their students to participate. This opt-in will be done through Genesis during the first week in November. At that time, when you log into Genesis, you will be asked one simple yes or no question as to whether or not your child can participate. Once answered, you will have complete access to Genesis. At that same time, we'll have a copy of the survey itself on our website for your review. Right now, individual buildings are making plans in order to have students take the survey in school between November 14th and 18th. Again, this is strictly voluntary. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Ms. Sherry Caravano, the WAMS Middle School Assistant Principal and District Anti-Bullying Coordinator, for her leadership in this area. Lastly, I want the entire community to know that all of our buildings have completed their first step in order to be assessed by the Regional Operations Intelligence Center of the New Jersey State Police pertaining to school safety and security. Today, the ROIC submitted their first completed report to us about the status of one of our buildings. I'll be sharing this report with members of the board and the Facilities and Operations Committee for consideration. Our next building is already scheduled for an assessment, and it is my expectation that all other buildings will be completed and assessed throughout the course of this year. So just some updates about school safety and security that I wanted to make sure everybody knew. If you didn't write all that down, you'll get it from me in an email shortly. So that being said, it is a shorter report for me tonight, as I do want to introduce our anti-bullying special coordinator for the district, who I had mentioned, Ms. Sherry Caravano, who is going to report to the board and the public about our data from the last half of the last school year and our self-assessment.
All right.
There you are.
Good evening. My name is Sherry Caravano. I am the district HIP coordinator. I am here to present our SSDS information from the second half of last school year. We are required to report twice a year with the information that we collect. We need to report our HIP trainings and programs, which I'll go over for each level of our district. And the incidents that we are required to report include alleged and confirmed HIPs and certain types of removals from an educational setting. So there are a few categories that we have: violence and vandalism, substance abuse, weapons, and other incidents that could lead to a removal. These are the numbers for the district, the total number of incidents, including the HIPs that are alleged and confirmed, as well as all the incidents that lead to a removal. The categories are a wide range, any type of physical altercation. The removal needs to be a half day or more from an educational setting. So that could include an in-school suspension of a half day or more, or an out-of-school suspension. In addition to the incidents, we need to report on the trainings and programs that we do. Across all levels, they look very different. Some of the trainings all of the trainings are focused on anti-bullying efforts across the district. Our programs, some of them you will see are one-time events, such as the Booster-thon fun runs that happen at the elementary school. Others are consistent, that happen all year, student meetings and different lessons that are happening in the classroom. At the UES, you will see a similar trend, some one-time events that took place in the spring of last year. Others are consistent from September through June, so they would also be included in this report. I think I just lost the ability to click. Here at WAMS, again, you will see a trend. Last year, we did our Mindful Mondays program all year long. That is included in the second reporting. We also had the IROC Assembly in January and other events that took place. At the end of the year, we did our Getting to Know WAMS for the incoming 7th graders. And at the high school, again, you will see a consistent trend of some events that took place all year long and one-time events such as Quaker Games, which took place in the spring at the end of the school year. In the district, this is just a summary of an example of the trainings that were offered to staff members, some of the professional development opportunities that they were provided throughout the spring of last school year. And the last piece of information that I need to share is our school self-assessment. We are required every year to self-assess based on 8 criteria. It's essentially how we are implementing the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. Each school has a rubric that we complete. It allows us to identify any deficiencies and areas where we think we could improve. One example, one of the criteria is just the location of anti-bullying information on the webpage. It is accessible under the parent tab, but in talking with the anti-bullying specialists, after every school went through this, the request was made to move it to the front page of every school's website. It's the top link in the quick link section, just to make it more available. So that was an example that came out of doing this self-assessment. All of the schools agreed, and we were thankful that IT was able to make that change for us on the website. This will get reported no later than October 31st, and as soon as we submit to the state, this report card will go on our school website. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would, good.
Mine's probably a higher level question. I completely am tracking everything that you just said, but I think what I'm missing a little bit is the bigger picture or the context. Exactly what are you presenting to us and why? Can you go back over that? I know you went through it super briefly.
Yes,
Like, what is
yes.
this whole presentation and what's the backstory for it?
So this is a requirement within the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights that we need to
Okay.
provide this report. We have to
Yes.
present this to the Board of Education twice a year.
Twice a year. Okay. Under the anti-bullying Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Okay. And so this is being presented by you to us in your role as, again, I'm sorry, the
As the district's HIP coordinator.
HIB coordinator. Okay, thanks.
Hi.
A lot of discussion all over the place about kids' behaviors, kind of keeping a dip post-COVID, coming back and that kind of thing. And
Yeah, in terms of the incidents, I will say during the pandemic, the years that we were in flux, the numbers were very down. So last year was probably our first snapshot of what would be normal. And even that is a little challenging to say last year was normal. I would say this year right now, we're experiencing, in my opinion, the most quote unquote normal school year we've had since pre-pandemic. The incidents were a little inconsistent. I think the numbers naturally went up just given we were back to school every day in a quote unquote typical year. Trends, the socialization among students tends to be across all levels. One of the things we're seeing the most, comments between students, just the ways that they're interacting, that I would say is probably right now the biggest concern.
That was my question. And thank you very much. I was curious in terms of going back to 2019, 18, just trying to understand if this is what we have expected, more or less, very similar to Sandra's question, and just in the context of where to situate these numbers as opposed to just like they're greater than zero.
I would say the years, this is my 5th year in district. My first year was normal. And then the spring of my 2nd year, we went into COVID. So even for me to have an understanding, I saw the data from prior to COVID. The last few years made it very difficult to track. I would say it depends on students. We're only a 2-year building here at WAM. So there are some years in comparison that you really can't look year to year and see a linear trend because our students change so quickly. So we try, when we look at our information, to not look at numbers, whether they're going up or down, but just the context of the incidents to see if we can identify trends and focus our anti-bullying efforts or even just our school climate efforts towards that. Right now, the biggest thing we're seeing is socialization.
And then
Students having difficulty socializing, knowing how to interact, things that maybe they were saying behind a screen that now they're saying in person, and the fallout from that.
Yeah, no, and I guess the self-assessment that you showed at the very end as well. Look, because I guess that that would be against the same standard regardless of how many students, correct?
So this criteria for the self-assessment is really how we are rolling out our implementation of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. Some of the categories, the training, how are you rolling this out to staff? Are you building anti-bullying efforts into your curriculum? And that looks different at every grade level. At the lower levels, the counselors go into the classrooms. At the high school, that's not really how we would get curriculum embedded into the day-to-day for the students. The ways that we put the information on the website, the reporting procedures, are we meeting the 10-day deadline? So this is more how we are implementing the law.
Right.
And it's an ability for us to see where we might need to work on our own growth to the next school year.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
I mean, kind of. I was just more curious, like, what is our self-assessment? What was our self-assessment in 18, 19, 20, just in terms of like, these are the self-identified areas of need.
Yes.
So in terms of like, hey, we fixed this, but then this other need cropped up. And I get how the cohorts of students go through and it's really
Yes.
not tracking individual.
And this
students,
is
but-
really how we as a building are implementing the law, not like this doesn't have anything to do with the students and
Right,
their
right.
behaviors. To be fully transparent, I haven't compared to last year's information. It is on the website and I can do that and
Yeah,
and get you
no,
that information.
I was
if
just
you wanna
curious
know
if
a
it was,
comparison.
yeah. No. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mick? Can I ask? Thank you, I appreciate it. So I see a lot of the same programming that I have a 21-year-old and I have a young one. So I see a lot of the same programming going through. How often do you evaluate the programming that's offered to match kind of the behaviors that you're seeing? So maybe we would do more socialization type things this year, given what you've said. So
There are some things we are legally required to do. We are required to recognize the Week of Respect every year. That is in the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. So you will always see that for every school building. In terms of what we need for our students, it does vary across levels. I know here at the middle school, we always bring in IROC, which is internet safety, because we always see social media issues popping up at this age level. In terms of evaluating what our students need, I think the school climate survey is going to be really helpful because that will be an excellent snapshot at what not only we think our students need and what our staff think our students need, but also the students saying what they need. Because we really haven't had an opportunity to ask our full student body, what do you need? And like at this level in the high school, I mean, of course, it's a grade 3 and up survey, but their feedback is going to be essential.
Yeah, Sherry, thank you so much for that. I just want to let the board know and members of the public know too, that we appointed Sherry to Ms. Caravano to this position 2 months ago. So she's already doing a bang up job on it too. And I'm expecting that over time, she's going to be able to more critically analyze trends. But I think that school survey is going to be an important part of what things that we do moving forward. And we should be able to track that.
I have a quick question about the survey. I'm getting the sense from the email and then from what you had said, Mike, at the beginning, it's much bigger. You keep using the word climate. So I understand that we're technically required to do a lot of things with regard to bullying under the law, and I completely respect that. But it sounds like your plan is a bit more holistic to look at climate overall, for example, a culture of inclusiveness and things of that nature. Am I on the right page?
You are. And I will say just in my conversations with Mr. Volpe about taking on the role, I understand the part of this role that has to do with the reporting and the nitty gritty of the law. But what excites me the most about being the district HIP coordinator is actually the other side, the preventative, the culture, the climate, the way things are done here. That for me is what excites me the most about this position. And I would say that is a focus.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caravano, much appreciated. We do have one other presentation this evening. Dr. Benton.
Just one more thing on that.
Sure, absolutely.
I got super excited about your excitement about the survey and all of that jazz. So will there be then a plan or something that's broader than even bullying coming out of the climate survey? And will you be responsible for that plan? And will you present it to the board?
Can I speak to that too?
Sure.
The data that we're going to receive is going to be presented back to each of our buildings, school climate teams.
Yes.
That is chaired by our anti-bullying specialists at the building. And we can talk about what the efforts are going to be moving forward. But the data is going to be specific to the buildings. So although Ms. Caravano may have some oversight as to what's going on, there could be very different things going on in one building versus another.
Gotcha. And then sort of this work, what's required by law when it comes to bullying is a bit of a double click on the more holistic kind of thinking around climate. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. I believe as an educator that the experiences that our children have in schools have to do with an overall climate. And if you have students who aren't included in a good climate, this is where your problems happen.
Gotcha.
So we do want to make sure that we do the minimally compliant things that we have to do by the law, like put together some presentations, but we also want to make sure we have an outstanding experience for every child. And that's the more of the leadership that I have tasked Ms. Caravano with, that she's off to a really great start at.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
And now I'll introduce Dr. Benton, who is going to be presenting our State of the District presentation for this year.
Good evening. I'm going to back up so I can have my notes because this is a lengthy presentation. So good evening. And our presentation tonight is to share with you where we are as a district in terms of our students' learning over this past year. So a lot of the data that you will see tonight is from our 21-22 school year. And a little bit of a look into what are the things that we're looking for and looking at as we start the 22-23 school year. As you know, this is the first year that we've returned to schools without, the COVID protocols of the previous 2 school years. And as I mentioned last time this year, we all lived through those past 2 years attempting to ensure the safety and well-being of our students and staff, but with an understanding that there would be an impact on learning. And so the goal tonight is to look at our district level data, knowing that our building administrators and our staff are continuously looking at building level data and individual student data to address, and I'll try to speak to both sides of the room, student level data to make the supports and interventions that we know that our students need. And then we want to talk a little bit about how we're going to focus moving forward, as well as to give some highlights of the things that even with all of the craziness of the last 2 years, our students have been able to achieve and accomplish. So a lot of what you will see tonight are K through 12 content area supervisors, which are part of my department in curriculum instruction, helped us to assemble what we're looking at. And it also is the team that I use along with our building administrators and our staff to begin to analyze and lead the conversations with our teachers and collaborate with them to develop the supports and interventions that we'll talk about. So teaching and learning, this year we returned to schools with each building being able to invite students and parents back in the ways that we've been traditionally been able to enjoy. As always, principals and their staff begin the year working with students to establish a sense of school culture and community and learning expectations for the classroom. In the next several slides, we will look at the state testing requirements and the graduation assessment requirements, as well as the results of state testing from spring of 2022 that are available at this time. So in New Jersey, in terms of our statewide assessment this year, we just recently finished giving the Start Strong assessment for grades 4 through 11. This was a new test for us last year. With the intent or the design of that test is to be a look back of a prioritized subset of standards from the previous year. So for instance, our 4th graders that took the exam this year were being assessed on a set of priority standards from their 3rd grade year. And we just finished that assessment, so we don't have the results of that. You won't see that tonight. In the spring, moving forward, we will again be able to get now a 2nd year of our NJSLA assessment, formerly known as PARC, for grades 3 through 11, and the New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Assessment, which was a new test last year, will be given to our grade 11 students. We have received notification that last year's test that the 11th graders who are now seniors took was going to be counted as a field test, and they have waived the graduation requirements for the class of 2023. So our current year seniors will not have to meet any of the 3 pathways that you see on the screen, here, but the class of 2024 and the class of 2025, our current juniors and sophomores, will have to meet these requirements. So the first pathway that students have to or can meet their graduation requirement is through the new test, the New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Exam. However, they can also access the second pathway, which is the different alternative assessment, which includes a former NJSLA test, which at this point only our students who took it in grade 9 would have access to that. SATs, their ACT, AccuPlacer, PSAT, ACT, and ASVAB. And then the third pathway for students who are not able to meet their graduation assessment through one of the tests, there's a third pathway, which is the appeals, the portfolio appeal. So for our class that just graduated, the class of 2022, we have 318 students who graduated. The overwhelming majority of those students met their graduation assessment requirement through Pathway 1 or Pathway 2. There are other alternatives for students, for instance, who are waived from the state testing through an IEP. They can have a different set of that. And then we do have students who were denied graduation. You do see asterisks there because those numbers are less than 5, and therefore we report them. We don't report them because of confidentiality. So now we'll take a look at our NJSLA results. And you can see here that for grades 3 through 11 from this past spring, we administered this. The last time that we were able to administer this was in spring of 2019. So 2.5 years ago. And so this is the first data point that we have after 2.5 years or 3 school years of not testing. We acknowledge that the remote and hybrid learning environment that occurred throughout the pandemic was no replacement for in-person learning with our teachers. And because of that, we anticipated seeing a drop in our performance, and we've worked along the way, I think, to be proactive to try to negate that, what we impact to learning. And again, as I said, we've done that in a very many of ways that I'll talk about. So you can see that as the district percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding expectations is significantly higher than the state in all of the grades. We saw the greatest impact, however, in our 4th graders, as well as a significant drop in our 7th and 8th grade. If we look at this, again, our last data point in terms of looking just at the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment was in 2019. And so you can see that there is a decline from 2019 to 2022, which we anticipated. And we see similar declines when we look at the state data as well. As a district, we performed above the state averages in all of the grades, but as anticipated, we did see a drop, and for ELA specifically in grades 4, 7, and 8. However, it is important to note that this is not cohort data, meaning that to track student performance for those who were in 3rd grade in 2019 before the pandemic hit, and those students would now be 6th graders. So this doesn't give us a snapshot of what individual students or individual grade levels as they moved through their those 3 school years. What it does show, however, is how our 3rd graders in 2019, who were not impacted by the pandemic, did compare to our 3rd graders post-pandemic. Another note to consider in interpreting this data is that the decline in overall performance on the test cannot be directly correlated to the amount of loss of learning that students experience due to how NJSLA was constructed and scored. So that is something else that we're considering. So in evaluating our decline, one of the other things that we've looked at and we have been able to do over the course of the pandemic is to use a set of different internal assessments, one of those being our MAP assessments. So if you look at this data, it shows you some cohort data. I will say we look at this we start our MAP testing now in 1st grade on a consistent level. And so the way that this data is most useful to us is to look at several data points across several years of growth. And then we can start to make some determinations about how different grades are performing, as well as this gives us individual student data, along with all of the different assessments that teachers do in the classroom. One of the specific things that we did note that we saw reflected in both our NJSLA data as well as our MAP data that was supported by our MAP data is that, for instance, in grades 7 and 8, the specific standard that was saw the greatest loss in performance was in writing. And we use a writer workshop model, for instance, and we know any teacher will tell you that's a very hard model, the writing workshop model, to deliver in a remote or a hybrid setting. So now that we're back in person and in full, that is something that our teachers are focusing on, right? Is writing in the classroom so that we can address that need. So we look at that same data for our math. Here we did not see as significant of declines, both in for the district level data, although the state did see significant drops in their performance. And for them, we look for grades 3 through 8, and then we look at our high school level courses, which I note we do have middle school students who test in Algebra 1 and geometry as well. If we look at the year-to-year comparison between 2019 and 2022, again, you see that there were some declines, not as significant as what we saw in ELA. And again, we still are outperforming the state averages in all of our grades. And at our high school level, I think we saw the least decline. And again, these are typically our older students. We're talking 9th, 10th, 11th graders, who we also know that in the hybrid and the remote, they were much more tech savvy. And so the delivery of instruction could happen easily, not easy, but then we saw in the younger grade levels. So again, we also look at that cohort data, and it does support the trends that we're seeing as we look at, for instance, you know, our third graders in the fall of 2022 were here, and then in the fall of 2021, we're at 84% meeting expectations, and in 2022 at 87%. So we do see some growth when we look across our cohort in math. The next area that we look at is our different subgroup performance. So this includes, we look at subgroups of gender, we look at our racial breakdown, as well as our students who are economically disadvantaged, and our ELL population, and our students receiving special education services. It is important to note, but it was hard for me to fit on the slide here, that many of these populations overall represent small percentages of our overall student population. For instance, our ELL population is about, while it has grown, it still only represents about 0.5% of our overall student population. Also, our our special education population is about 17% of our overall student population. That said, we do see disproportionate outcomes for some of our subgroups. One thing that we keep in mind is that some of our students here may be represented in multiple categories. For instance, I may be a Latino student who is also an ELL learner who may also be economically disadvantaged. So that one student would be counted across and in all of those groups. Another thing, and this has been shown across the state, across the nation, is that many students, especially those who are economically disadvantaged, we know were most impacted by, the pandemic and the after, effects of that. And so there are a lot of other factors that contribute to this. That said, while we certainly look at the data broadly to develop grade level and building level supports, we also, because we have small numbers, our teams of administrators and staff work to develop individual supports for students to improve outcomes. And so we see similar outcomes when we look at our older grade levels in those subgroups, as well as when we look and compare between math and ELA. Sorry, this is okay. So moving forward in ELA, what are we doing and what are our areas of focus? So one of the things that we have in our elementary grades, K through 5, is a new ELA curriculum that we are in the first year of implementation. One of the things as we went, the team of teachers and our pilot teachers, as well as our ELA supervisor, thought about when we were selecting and then piloting the resources, is we were looking for something that was going to help us to provide tier 1 interventions in the classroom to all students. And so the program that we've adopted has that. It also has several formative assessments that allow allow teachers to make on the spot support plans for students, and to identify what the needs are and how they can be addressed as part of the general education program. In addition, we are using our reading and math support teachers in order to deliver targeted instructions in small group settings. At the secondary level, we are just beginning the process of piloting new resources that are going to look to address some of the same concerns that we have. As I mentioned, we're focusing on written expression in grades 7 and 8, and actually also in 9, because those students moved up to the high school. And we're looking to review the current high school English resources for future programming needs. We're also in our younger grades, we're piloting a new fluency and dyslexia screener that will both help to identify students early, as well as to help develop a plan for support to address early indicators for dyslexia. In math, our goal has been for several years to increase student engagement with mathematical modeling, reasoning, and application. We are using the investigative math program in grades 4 through 5, which has a push-in structure with enrichment activities for all. In addition to that, we do have our math support teachers who are looking at specific data to identify student needs, as well as that small group and targeted instruction. As I said, while there are many different, there are these standardized assessments, such as the NJSLA, I think more importantly are all the ways that teachers gather data about students and their needs along the way, because those are the things that allow us to make immediate instructional decisions in support of students' learning needs. So we'll also look at our science data. So here we do not test every year. We do that in grades 5, 8, and 11. And as you can see, compared to the state average, our students do significantly better. We do, however, from previous years have seen drops in performance. And as we saw before, we do see, again, some of the same disproportionalities when we look at our subgroups. So for science, similar to how we now have 2 data sets that are 3 years apart. So we continue to look at our standards to help us and align our curriculum to the standards, as well as adopting a set of assessments that are both formative and substantive that will mirror the state assessment in their format and complexity to help prepare our students to sit for that exam. We continue to develop and adapt those assessments, as well as in grades 1 through 5, when we are next up for curriculum adoption in both science and what's not here is social studies, but we're looking for ways to integrate that with both the new ELA program and the math program that would be adopted in the next couple of years. So we do have, for some special education students where it is deemed through the IEP that the NJSLA would not be an appropriate assessment. Students take an alternative assessment. We do have, again, a small number of our special education students who are eligible for this exam. And so we, again, have reported kind of root data here, grades 3 through 6, our elementary population, and then our secondary population. This gives us information in these 4 categories. And again, where you see asterisk information, it means that the population tested was less than 10. So we do not report those numbers for confidentiality. And then our English language learners. So I will draw your attention to the chart on the left, which just gives how our ELL population has grown since 2018. And you can see that post pandemic, in this last 2 years, we've had more than a doubling of our ELL population. And while that certainly still represents a very small, like I said, about 0.5% of our overall student population, it is a significant increase. And so part of what we have done is that we are making sure that we're addressing the needs of those students. One way that we do that is when those students are initially, when the students initially enter into the district, they take the access test and then they take that again at the end of the year. And so what you see here is the spring 2022 access results, and it assesses the 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And we use that information to provide supports for the ESL, as well as to determine the proper placement in terms of their English learning. And so you can see here, again, we've kind of cohorted this data in grade bands and how our students are, what level our ELL students are in their language acquisition. And so we will transition a little bit to talk about the academic achievement of our students. And again, I stress that there's no way that I could talk about each individual student or group of students and the wonderful things that they do. But over the next couple of slides, I like to end with just kind of highlighting some of the things that our students have achieved. So here you can see that at the high school, which is really like the culmination of our K through 12 program, you can see that when we look at things like our national merit program that is based on SAT performance, we've had 5 students across the nation who qualify for that honor, as well as another 23 who received commendation. We also, for our AP Scholar program, and we'll look a little bit at some AP data, we have more students who are taking the AP exam. And not only have we seen an increase in the number of students taking it, but we've been able to maintain our pre-pandemic performance in terms of the AP exams. And so this is kind of is represented here in terms of the number of students who are getting the honors level and the distinction level in the AP. Our national French exam and Latin exam and Spanish, Tim, I think represents our robust world language program, as well as we look at our community service hours that students are able to achieve over the course of their 4 years in high school. At 191 students are able to attain 50 to 250 hours of community service. And here at the bottom, you can see some of the awards that our students have earned. And now we do offer many opportunities for students to participate in the College Board suite of assessments. We give the PSAT to our juniors. And so you can see here the 3-year performance in both math as well as in English and reading and writing. And that's also for our sophomores. I will also note that this year, for the first time, we gave the PSAT 8-9 test to our 9th graders as an opportunity for them to, one, kind of have the PSAT experience, as well as they, from that test, are able to get information about areas that they can improve on, as well as access to the College Board resources to help prepare for future PSAT and SAT tests as well. You can see our SAT performance. And just to remind you that in 2019 and specifically 2020, there were many less opportunities for students to sit for the SAT or ACT exams, but you can see that overall throughout that, our performance has actually improved from the 2019 school year. And similar results when we look at the ACT. And then here, if we look at our 5-year AP performance, you can see that we have increased the number of students taking AP courses. And then total number of exams that they're taking. And what's really nice is that when you push for increased enrollment and creating access for more students to have that AP experience, which we know is a great preparation for college, oftentimes with that, you may see an initial dip in scores, right? Because you have students who are first time to AP and they are adjusting to the rigor. However, the quality of our instructional program within our AP has allowed us to actually, stay consistent percentage of students who are receiving a 3 or better. And you can see here that we've been able to maintain the same percentage of students getting the 3, where we did see in that first year, right back from the AP exam, that there was a decrease. And in 2020, because of the virtual setting, the test was abbreviated, and so it was a very different exam than what students took post pre-COVID. And so 2022 was the first year that we had a fully restored AP exam, if you will. So that is very promising performance from our students and staff. We also, one of the things that we look at is our post-graduation outcomes. And so one of the things that I will, note here is that as students made decisions about their post high school goals in 2020 and 2021, a lot of students made difficult decisions about, do I pursue 2-year? Do I pursue 4-year? Do I go directly into the workforce? And so, for instance, as one example, we saw an increase from previous years in the number of students who were going or choosing to go to, say, community college, because at that time, colleges were mostly all virtual. And so in 2022, our recently graduating class, we started to see a shift back to students pursuing 4-year colleges as an option. So that's just one example of some of the decision-making that happened and the adjustment that students made for their post-high school plans. And probably the biggest indicator that we want to look at is we can send our students to college, but we want to see them matriculate through. And so one of the things that the National Student Clearinghouse looks at is what is the college persistence, meaning that they are in year 2 at the school that they enrolled in when they after graduation. And so Morristown specifically for this past year, and when we look over our previous 3 classes, has maintained college persistence at 95%. So that is very good. The average nationally is about 80%, to give context. And this is a list of some of our class of 22 college acceptances. Not all, but some. And last year was the first year that we were able to return for our visual and performing arts, although we did so with a few modifications. This year, we anticipate that we will be able to have a full visual and performing arts schedule without any restrictions. These are some highlights from last year's performances. Okay, it might have died on me finally. Can you, thank you, advance it for me? And again, we have a very rigorous performing art program where our students are able to achieve a number of honors and rewards. We also have an active extracurricular and athletic program at our high school and at WAMS. And a few highlights from that is that our girls lacrosse and field hockey were sectional champions in 2021 and 2022. Our boys golf were sectional champions in 2022. We also have our state champions for unified basketball, and our programs for our unified sports program. You can go to the next one. Include, I'll just go through them. At WAMS, it is basketball, and Sherry left. Basketball, let me see if I can name them all. Basketball, bowling, we added. Track. Is that okay? And then at the high school, I'm like forgetting. At the high school, we do bowling, track, basketball as well. And soccer. Thank you. I knew Dave would help me out. And so you can see here that many of our students do go on to play collegiate sports. And represented here are 32 students at 14 different universities from last year. I think so. Yep. As well as our unified sports program received the Special Olympics honor and distinction, and we're able to travel to Orlando, Florida last year. And some of our milestones are listed here. And that ends my presentation. We do want to thank our staff and administration for their dedication and commitment to our students over the last couple of years, but even as we now move into what is this post-pandemic, we know that our teachers, our staff, our administrators are still working very hard for our students. And I think that you see that reflected in our presentation today when we look at our students, both in terms of their academic performance, their extracurricular activities that they have been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. Questions?
Sorry, Dr. Benton, thank you for that thorough presentation. I'm sure you are going to get a few other questions, but I just want to say for members of the public, especially if you like digging into the data, we will have this presentation posted on our website. So if you didn't write down every single little thing you wanted to look at, you will have this as a reference up there. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Dr. Benton. That was very, very informative, as it always is every year. With respect to specifically grades 4, 7, and 8 in the one data slide, or I guess a couple of data slides that you'd shown, what are your thoughts on the reasons for sort of the greater decline within those bands?
In grade 7 or 8, we have sat down and done an actual standards analysis, and we've looked at what was the performance in each standard. And specifically, we did not see as great of an impact in reading as we did in writing. So we know that in grade 7 and 8, the overall decline is attributed to writing, which, as I said, we use in the grades preceding 7 and 8. We use the writer's workshop model, which is difficult to deliver in a virtual and remote setting. So again, in terms of, we've talked a lot about how did we anticipate what the learning needs were going to be. That is one of the things. And so we did address it, as I said, in the Into Reading program, K-5. Writing is an essential component, and teachers have time to go through that. They conference, like we're addressing it through some of the curricular decisions that we made. In grade 4, it is a year that we typically see a dip, not just here in Morristown, but in the state, across the nation, I think. And so that is year to year when we compare to other grades, we see that. But I think some of the other factors, it's a year of transition for our students, right? They go from their K-3 buildings to the UES building. So I think that was another thing that may have, contributed to what we saw as the decline.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for questions.
Couple comments. Similar to Mark's about the transition, but I will say continued frustration about the disparity in achievements among groups. And I know that's not new news, doesn't mean it's acceptable news either. And I do wonder, as I was, reviewing the rest of the data, what it looks like to disaggregate some of that other data that we shared, AP participation and AP scores, participation in extracurricular events, all of those things. I think it's incumbent upon us. And even looking at some of the action steps in literacy, math, and science, do we think about disparate disproportionate results when we think about the professional learning in literacy instruction, math instruction. You know, I'm super supportive of our literacy initiative going forward. And I think, you know, that thinking about how the educational experience that all kids receive impacts, you know, in every day, that it's not just something we look at when we get a score report back from the state. But I will say, as often as people on this board have heard me complain about MAP testing, there was a correlation where you saw that the MAP testing in 4th grade had a dip last year, and that was shown to prove out in state assessments. So it's probably one of the few instances I've seen where MAP was somewhat predictable of the state assessment stuff. Carol has heard me complain about this in 7 years that I've been looking at that data. But you know, I commend all the work that goes into this, and you know, I just encourage us not to explain away some of this stuff. And I think one of the things that is super important is that we take action based on this. And I know when we looked at this data in curriculum committee, there's a huge anticipation of what would happen with our 3rd graders last year. You know, when you talk about opportunity to write, I just can't even imagine what it would be like to learn how to read in virtual environments over these last few years. And that was not as significant an impact as I think we may have anticipated. So I think, you know, we have the right people on board, and I appreciate all this work, but I would be remiss not to call out some of those disproportionate outcomes.
I was curious, in the context of math, similar to Mark's question with the ELA, given that we are going into a math K-4, K-5 adoption process, have you, or can we look at that sort of bystander approach? Because I was looking at like grade 8 in particular, like it went from 55% to 45%. So it's always been an area of need and struggle for us as a district, that by 8th grade in 2019, 55% of the students were reaching proficiency. I didn't know if that level of sort of, you know, specification in terms of where those deficiencies might help instruct the kind of adoption that we undergo for K-5, knowing that it's all downstream of grade 7 or 8.
And I think that we will. For instance, when we had the ELA adoption, and I reported about this in our curriculum committee meeting, it was in the process as COVID, you know, unfolded. And so when it picked, you know, so it was for a year, it was kind of like, let's, you know, we got to focus on the kids. But then when we picked it back up, they actually reassessed, right, based on current data that they had. And they made a decision to switch to a different curricular resource, right? And that was a direct response to what teachers were identifying as the needs that we could see, and then the needs that we were also anticipating, because, for instance, we couldn't, you know, deliver the writing workshop model the way that we knew it needed to be done and with fidelity, right? So I think we've done that, and we will continue to do that. Julie Colby is our math supervisor, and so she is looking at the data. She's incorporating that into kind of the professional discourse that she's having with teachers. She's working with her math support teachers to kind of get an insight to what our neediest students that are already receiving the basic skills instruction are. And so all of that, in addition to standards and instructional technology offer, all of those are going to inform, right, that selection committee and the process. And I think what we'll talk about this in November, one of the things that we will move to when we talk about selection process is that there have to be some things that, based on our known students' needs, that become non-negotiables, right? That we know that these things need to be present in any a curriculum that we choose, because these are the things that we prioritize as the needs of our students. So I do think there's a process to that, and I'll be sharing that with you.
Oh, thank you.
So along those lines, and I'm going to try to change up my question a little bit on the fly, because you spoke to it, or Sandra spoke to it a little bit, and Dr. Snyder did as well. I guess I'm trying to get a deeper understanding of how, we've got the I guess the greater ship to lift, right? Especially in those grades that Mr. Villanueva pointed out. but then the lower performance, I should say, of those specific groups.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of trying to kind of serve both of those purposes at the same time? And kind of how you're thinking through that, please.
So I really think it goes to kind of like that multi-tiered systems of supports.
Mhm.
So we know that we have to choose a curricular resource, right? And have instructional strategies that address the needs of all of our learners, right? We use our data though to identify students who may be in need of additional supports and additional interventions. And then we can offer those interventions and supports in the classroom, which call those tier 1 interventions. We also have other programs such as our basic skills program, which we call reading and math support, that either are pull-out programs or at the upper levels, students are scheduled for additional classes where they receive what some people might call a second touch, right? And that may not be just reiterating the same curriculum, but it is an intervention program, for instance, right? So it's going to address a subset of needs that may not be present in the classroom of 25, right? But now we're in a classroom of maybe 6 or 8 students, a small group setting, where that teacher is able to deliver some intervention instruction that we would not normally offer to students who are not in need of that in the general education setting. That said, we're not taking those students who need additional supports out of the general education. So it's not a replacement, but it's on top of. So I think that's really the way that we do it. And then there's, a tier 3 if needed for students who, may have other things, other needs that can't be addressed in the classroom and can't be addressed within the scheduling of the basic skills program.
Okay.
Does that
And
answer your question?
it does. I guess I'm left with then, how different is that? I understand we have, it's a different program, right? The multi-tiered system of support. But how is that different? I mean, I remember when I was in this school building, we had that. Obviously, I didn't understand the pedagogy then, but we had something similar where kids were pulled out, they were grouped differently. So how is that different in that approach versus what we've been doing that's getting us the results we're getting now?
So I may not be able to speak to it fully because but my
Yeah,
understanding.
you weren't here when I was, just
Yes.
for the record, you were not teaching here or in charge of curriculum when I was in school here.
Yes, but
Yes.
for instance, so I'll take ELA for an example. So we have adopted Into Reading, right? Into Reading, one of the things that it had that we knew we needed was that it does have specific supports for instructing and providing tier 1 supports in the classroom. So that's the program that we use all K-5. Within our reading and reading or basic skills program, the reading and math support, we use Wilson. We have level literacy at the UES and the WAMs, and those are specifically intervention programs. So they would, for instance, focus on things like fluency building, which is a foundational skill that supports, right, the general education curriculum. So because what we know is that if students may not be able to perform with the higher level and complexity of tasks if they don't have fluency skills. We don't want to just have them do fluency skills though, right? And take them away from those more complex and rigorous tasks that then prepare them to take, the NJSLA, for instance. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, if you will, for those students. And then we're using the data to identify who those students are and then what their needs are.
No, I appreciate your answer and your patience with me because I'm
No,
not on
it's
the
okay.
curriculum committee anymore. So I don't get to ask this all
Yes,
the time.
yes, Dave, please.
Thank you. All right, so at those different tiers, there are different tools in the toolbox that the teachers are using. So, the latest and the greatest professional development that we can give to the teachers, we are doing that. So we are providing them with the tools that they need to try to reach those kids in a different way. That's all I wanted.
And I just would, not maybe so much of a question, but I'm sure it is a question that you are starting to think about as far as looking at the, we started to talk about it in curriculum committee, but really looking at the learning loss. And I know we talking a little bit about directing it, addressing it through new curriculum adoption, but then really starting to, as we move into budget season, looking at how we have used our, COVID funding to support, student learning, but now moving forward, really how we're going to be able to support still, the learning loss and helping with those scores, and how we're going to need to really prioritize our budget. So, really looking at, I think we're going to look at doing the budget a little bit differently this year and really trying to itemize in each of the committees how we were prioritizing what comes out. So, looking at November and December, that coming through curriculum as far as really identifying not just how the math pilots, but, how we're looking at allocating resources, will be important moving forward in our discussion. So, thanks.
I just have one question. So it's very clear. It was a great presentation and good 20,000 foot overview with lots of little deep dives, but it's clear you're using the data to find trends and insights to inform your day job and the day job of all the other folks on your team and professional staff. But Mike, it makes me really think, like, when it comes to the role of the Board of Education, and I don't sit on the curriculum committee, you talked about one of your 3 goals that we've all held hands with you on being to look at cumulative and aggregated data for gaps in student achievement and to get specific, leaning on the data on what are we going to do to say these are the gaps that are the most important. And this is, to Lauren's point, this is where we're going to prioritize our resources and investment. And then we're going to measure our progress against those very specific goals or targets that we set. So what can we expect there from you when it comes to taking all the data and getting more specific in what we want to focus on? And then how do we measure ourselves? Because we're getting hit with this information in lots of places, but I need to get specific.
Sure. There's a couple things right now. My principals and I believe supervisors too with Dr. Benton, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, they're looking at data too. They're not only looking at this data, but they're looking at some of their internal data. And the reason why we have until the end of October to finalize our goals is because we want to make sure we do a deep dive into that data. And for some of our administrators, it's the first time in a couple of years we've really looked at academic achievement data and put goals to it. So that is being developed right now. And I think you can look at 2 things during the course of this year. During the course of this year, there's going to be some either summative goals or benchmark goals, because what some of my principals are reporting back to me is, Mike, this has been a problem over time. So I want to work on this goal, but I actually have a 3-year goal planned on this. And I'm like, that's fine. Let's make incremental progress towards closing that gap this year. I don't expect that there's a silver bullet out there that, haha, I have the magic knowledge. It's going to be constant assessment of students. It's going to be constant assessment of what we're doing. And if it's not working, doing something different. So at the end of this year, we should have some kind of goal statement where we can say we've made this much progress in closing this gap, whether it is in ELA across the board at a building, whether it is an ELA in one of those disaggregated areas, whether it's our students of color or economically disadvantaged students. We want to see these gaps close. And it should be able to be reported back through curriculum committee. What is each building doing and what is their progress? Now, as superintendent, it's part of my role to check in with them. It is a mid-year review in February. And one of the things that I've asked my buildings to do is shoot high, because by the state in February, if we shot too high, they let us adjust our goals. So I'm like, let's not start low and like meet it by February. Let's start really high and say we're going to close it this much. So there could be a mid-year review point where we could look at that, and then it'll be reported out again at the end of the year.
Also, just so I'm tracking, then the goals are developed at the building-based level, and there may be double clicks based on specific populations, and those goals roll up to you and subsequently get visibility through the curriculum committee. And then me, not on the curriculum committee, will get a readout from the curriculum committee.
Sure. And I think in a longer term sense is that if I've laid forth this pathway, and if this is done correctly, we should kind of be turning the corner coming into next year, already having a sense of where we're going on the next step. Since we came out of a pandemic, and it's the first time that in a long time that principals have really been asked to look at this data and create goals, sort of starting from scratch. But if we make progress in one of those gap areas at the end of this year, and we can say, let's keep that going and move towards that next year, we'll already be another step ahead. So
Okay.
I would anticipate that not only will we have what you described right there, but we'll also have a sense of where we're going into next year. Hey, this goal has been achieved. We can move on. Or you know what? We're like really moving in the right direction. We're 70% there. This should be the same goal for that building next year.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
I don't necessarily have anything all that different to say, except that I think I think the data that we saw in curriculum that has now been shared was not surprising. But I do think that it is great for us to have a starting point to really understand where are our students on an aggregate level. And I appreciate the attention given at both the macro and micro level about how we can affect the education of all of our students, because every student lost something in the past 2 years, and we cannot take our eye off the ball. And to Lauren's point, that was a significant part of our conversation, was that human resources and capital resources, financial resources, it is all about getting these students back on track in my mind. And so I do think that it was great that we are all aligned. We know where we are, and we can start to set goalposts to get, to get our kids learning back to where they should be. That's all I wanted to say.
Sorry, quickly, I just had a question about the dyslexia. It sounds like there's a new screen. Is it a new screening that the district is going to implement, or is it?
So we've always had a requirement for screening for several years.
Right.
I think we've used a couple of different tools to do that. The dyslexia screener that we're using now is a part of this NWEA, which is also does MAP. So the nice thing about it is that it allows us to kind of the data to speak to each other, as well as it's a tool that the teachers are familiar with in terms of the platform and whatnot. And we have found that the level of reporting that we get back in terms of, what are the needs of the student, what would be suggested next steps, is a starting point for there to be a plan in place for students who might be identified through the screener.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? All right. I guess actually I should letting you conclude.
And that is the conclusion of the superintendent's report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Stickler for process. All right. Okay, so now we'll move on to the board committee reports. So we do this in any order we like. Lauren, all right, thank you.
Sure. So curriculum met on October 13th. First thing, Kat D'Ambra presented a teen mental health award update. She informed the committee that the high school had received a mental health grant. It should be noted that this was not funding related, just resource related. The 11th grade is piloting a program that will be used to train and inform curriculum decisions moving forward. So she presented an overview of that. Then Dr. Benton reviewed the state of the district presentation. We had a very robust discussion about the data that we just, had presented to us. So we'll recap that. And then we talked about the curriculum approval process. Last month, I had said that we would vote for approval of the summer curriculum in October. We decided in curriculum to postpone that for November's agenda. I think everyone at this point has access to the curriculum that was written over the summer. It's in the shared Board of Ed drive, so you can take a look now, review it if you want. You can ask Karen or Mike questions about it, and then that will be on November's board agenda to approve. And then we just kind of talked again about what the new 5-year cycle is going to be for implementation of curriculum moving forward that, Karen had set up. And moving forward, that was how we're going to have the curriculum scope and sequence of documents that have been shared. And that's all in the shared drive for review. And that is our meeting minutes.
Questions or comments? All right, I think we'll just keep going this way.
Sounds good. So policy committee met on October 11th. So we had a couple of things that we discussed that aren't on for first or second reading. The first was policy 9190, which is the community organization, and 9210, which is the parent organization. So we were, there's 3 different things we were trying to work through and kind of making a plan going forward. The first is to sort of adequately communicate with all current affiliate organizations a similar level of understanding. We want a similar level of understanding about any events that are going to be planned in the 22-23 year for liability concerns. So Mike is drafting something that will go out to the affiliate organizations to sort of better help us understand between now and April, which leads me to the second part, which is that as the policy is currently written, affiliate organizations would come to the policy committee in April and sort of discuss their plans, that what happened, and then potential plans for the following year. And that is not very clearly defined, and it's very ambiguous as to why a policy committee would or would not advocate to the rest of the board that an affiliate organization retain its affiliate status. So it seems problematic as currently written, and we wanted to sort of clarify what that process would specifically look like. The third thing that we are concerned with is just the very nature of those 2 policies is not terribly clear in light of how the different organizations are delineated, be they club, community organization, booster club, parent organization. So again, this is going to be a recurring theme on the minutes for this committee, as it is something that's going to take several months to sort of lay out. We'll be meeting as a group, both probably multiple times during the month, to try to work out both in the short term what to do, and then in the long term what makes sense from a policy perspective for the district. The second thing we looked at was it was brought to our attention that the district currently has 2 policies of the same title, which is not surprising given that sometimes things happen over time. So one of the policies that's on for abolishment tonight is something that has been subsumed by some other existing policy, 2425 physical education, because 2425, which is the emergency remote plan, which is mandated by the state, is on as well. So they both can't have the same number. So that's why you see an abolishment for the physical education policy that is accounted for somewhere else. We also talked about policy 163, which will come back, dealing with quorum and the doctrine of necessity and sort of the clarifications around that. So again, that's going to be something that will come back to the board. But again, we wanted to get further clarification on what exactly it should say. Another thing we talked about was policy 143.2, which deals with high school student representation to the board. We were really kind of excited about this. There is new mandated legislation, I should say policy, that requires we have a student member of the board. We currently have board liaisons, but this would be different. This would be a student representative who would be on the board in hopefully a more integrated capacity. So that's not on for first or second reading, but seemed to us to be a really exciting way to integrate students and improve student voice on the Board of Education. And the last thing we discussed, which is not on for, is the student journalism 5722, which again, there was new mandated statutes dealing with students' freedom of expression. We have currently a policy 2432 dealing with school-sponsored publications. And rather than just abolish one and accept the new one, we needed more time to look at the 2 and how we could coexist and sort of probably combine them into one cohesive policy. The policy is on for first reading tonight. There's just a small revision to 3161 dealing with examination for cause. It does not change anything in the process. It just deals with the underlying code. And again, similarly, 5513 care of school deals strictly with addressing the school district's right to reimburse for damaged, lost, or destroyed things. It does not change anything in current MTPS process, but just updates the language and deals with an updated legal citation. And there are no changes. Oh, maybe one change to a policy. I should, we can get that when we get to the actual, right? Yeah. All right. So other than a grammatical change, there will be no changes to second reading. And that's all I got. 143.
Just real quick, the community organizations and clubs policy, I appreciate the committee continuing to look at it. It's been, you know, I was chair of the policy committee years ago, and that was always something that we were looking at and trying to figure out, you know, how we can make it clearer and more applicable, I think, to Morristown. And so it's not like this is a new thing. And so I think it's great that the committee is continuing to look at it, and it sounds like get some momentum into actually, you know, concretizing some changes and implementing it as intended. So thanks.
Dr. Snyder. Okay, moving right along. Dr. Alberti.
We did meet as a communications committee right after our last board meeting on September 28th, which was right after our board retreat as well. And so most of the time in communications committee, we talked about a lot of the same content that we talked about in our retreat, specifically about board meetings and how they run. And one of the things we attempted to do is kind of set the room up differently. So it invites us to have more conversation among board members during our meeting. We talked a little bit about the open public comment sections, which I'm sure you'll hear more about as Mr. Weeks introduces those segments of the meeting this evening. And then finally, just starting with some ideas around resurrecting the community engagement forum and what some possibilities might look like about how we structure those, the purpose behind those, the topics for those as well. And so I will just take this opportunity to remind members of the communication committee that we received an email from Mr. Volpe today asking for potential agenda items because our next meeting is on Wednesday morning virtually. Next Wednesday, right?
All right, any questions or comments for Dr. Alberti? Thanks, Mr. Villanueva. F&O.
Thank you. So finance and operations met on October 4th, my wife's birthday, which she was thrilled about the 7:30 meeting. I circulated the minutes as per usual. Some of the highlights, we talked about the new housing developments, which has been and will continue to be a running item on our agenda every month, to talk about sort of what we're learning about them, current projections in terms of when they'll be completed, and potential student enrollment. We don't really have any updated numbers, but we continue to monitor the new developments. Mr. Heiser reviewed a municipal map with us and showed us potential areas of redevelopment, which was very helpful as we think about how to address potential increase in population and the potential financial impact of that. We also, as I mentioned last month, we were talking about the cadence of our RFP for professionals. We had talked about potentially putting it on a 2-year cycle rather than a 3-year cycle, which would have meant that we pushed out RFPs this year for professionals. We decided that the committee decided ultimately not to recommend going down that path, and that the RFPs for professionals will go out next year in the normal course. We reviewed a number of overnight trip requests that are included in the agenda for this evening for approval. Committee obviously recommends approving those. Mr. Heiser went over the collaborative federal desk monitoring report and corrective action plan that examined our expenditure of COVID-related funds and an audit of that. And there were, I don't even want to call them discrepancies. There are, I think, just miscommunications with the desk monitoring board that were resolved and are really non-issues. We have our annual financial audit is scheduled for November, which is really exciting. I'm sure James is thrilled about that. We discussed the upcoming budget process. I think everybody on the board knows that we would like to get this going sooner rather than later, earlier than what we've done in the past. And as Ms. Romano had articulated earlier, really get the priorities from the various committees. And obviously that requires hearing from administration, principals, supervisors and the like, so that we can be better informed as to what their priorities are, so that we can make some decisions about what our priorities are as well. So that will be underway earlier than it usually is, which I think is great. I mean, I think in my view, the budget process should be more of a year-long thing rather than a crunch in February and March. And so I'm looking forward to undergoing a novel way to look at this. Years ago, we were exploring getting some sponsorships or a sponsorship for the football stadium. And the committee recommends and has given Mr. Volpe the green light to reignite that and to see, if we can get some sponsorships for the stadium. It would be an additional revenue source, obviously, that we definitely need. And so that will be underway as well. We discussed the additional special ed paraprofessional positions that are on the agenda for this evening. And as we know, it'll actually be 3. And the committee recommends approving those as well. We also discussed our efforts in hiring diverse staff and kind of where we are on that. I mean, we've talked about that at length in the past. We had a committee and subcommittee to examine those issues and talk about how we as a district can recruit and retain a more diverse staff. Obviously, right now, the environment in hiring staff as a general matter is very tough, both here in Morristown, New Jersey, but also nationwide. But we are going to take a look either next month or the following at how we're doing and what, if anything, we can do to make sure that we don't lose sight of that goal. And that was it. Any questions?
I do.
Fire away.
Thanks. So I'm excited to hear that you're talking about starting the budget process earlier. That was something we aligned on as a board and I'm happy about, but we talked about a couple of other things, I believe agreed upon them as a board. And I'm wondering, will it be discussed at your committee? How will we make sure that we stay true to the commitments that we made? I can't remember exactly how you said it, Mr. Volpe, but it was pretty eloquent. It was about not just building-based budgets, but ones that are based on a per pupil enrollment and a little bit of a more of a whiteboard approach to budgeting at that building-based level. And then also ticking and tying our budget priorities or line items to more of an impact assessment, showing how they tick and tie back to our strategic priorities as a district, because those were some of the gaps that we talked about during the budget workshop last go around and committed that we needed to change going forward.
Sure, and we will be addressing those issues, and Mr. Heiser is already talking about starting the budget process a little bit earlier, but to what Ms. Romano was talking about too. When it comes to how we supported students through the COVID pandemic and how we responded, we have a lot of issues to look at. And what we have to do collectively as a board and as a community and as a staff is decide what are our highest priorities. And we may not be able to fund every single priority we have out there. We have to make sure we are funding the highest priority. And some of that may have to do with learning loss, closing those gaps. So these are tough discussions that we're going to have that will, yes, come through the committee structure. And when we come to you with recommendations about either new staffing ideas or potentially looking at allocating staffing differently, we will have a rhyme, a reason, and a rationale for why we need to do so. So we will connect that back to our strategic plan objectives, even if they're a little bit in flux right now, but it will be certainly a matter of prioritizing. Unfortunately, we just can't roll everything over and say, hey, it's all covered. If we rolled everything over, every person who's working here right now, every bus route that we have, everything coming over, we're over budget. So we are going to have to look at some strategic planning, for lack of a better word, because we had an influx of federal funds, and those federal funds are going to be no more. So do we want to continue doing those things that we did with those federal funds? If yes, that means we're going to have to reprioritize some of the things we did before that.
That's helpful. I guess I'm still missing the part about like more of the whiteboard approach and rethinking it at the fundamental level. Is that part of that
Sure.
too?
And it's more of like a zero-based budgeting
Yes,
approach.
Exactly. I call whiteboard.
That's okay.
I
No
call
problem.
zero-based budgeting, whiteboard budgeting,
Yes.
but yes,
Yeah,
synonymous.
it is along those lines, but to be perfectly honest, when it comes to education, although I'll say a zero-based budgeting approach, we're going to teach kindergarten, first grade, second grade. There are some things that are naturally going to roll over, but yes, that are fixed. But some of those things where we have discretion, that's where we want to start from baseline zero and decide what are the big rocks that we want to put in. We got to put them in first if we want to make sure that they fit. So it's just not a true zero-based or a true whiteboard. We're going to have some things up on the board already.
Any other questions about finance and operations? Comments? Okay. Any off-board committees? Reports, information from that? All right, then we shall move on. Okay, now we come to our first public comment section. So before I read the typical preamble and we take a vote and then invite people to come up for public comment, just want to comment a little bit about public comment. So this first public comment period, as I always say, as the president always says, is on agenda items. During our conversations at our board retreat and in the communications committee, we've been talking more about how to help the public better understand how we could best use the information presented at public comment and actually what it means for our meeting in public. So we are going to be taking action on several items in this agenda here. And public comment is necessary. It's something we encourage and want so we can help, we can have people's input help us with our decisions that we're about to make. Now, I've actually had some conversations as I've gone to home and school meetings, actually the home and school meeting here at WAMS last week. We had a good conversation about this because I was sharing a bit about this as I was going around to the different home and school meetings. And, you know, as we were talking it out, sure, it's important. It's a great opportunity for people to hear public comment here. There are times where people will say something during public comment that others who are in the audience and that are present with us or maybe online may hear and think, oh, well, I was thinking the same thing, and kind of let them know that that's something that's being talked about. But also, if you think about the main purpose being to help inform us as we make our decisions, hearing it just before, you know, you just heard that we all had committee meetings. We all had access to the committee reports, the minutes to those committee reports before we came here. So a lot of these things we've kind of started thinking about already in our heads. And here at public comment, we'll get some more input. But then we're going to go right into the decision-making. So we want to make sure that while, people are still encouraged to come here and make their public comment on these agenda items, you don't necessarily have to wait until this point to give your public comment. We've been talking throughout this year and actually further back before that about how the board is accessible in other ways. We've created a form that people can go online and fill out things. You can email any of the board members, which several people have taken advantage of. But we just want to be clear that what you're doing here with public comment, those of you who are going to comment, is helping us as we're thinking about the decisions we're going to make. So how will you see that? Another piece is when we go to do votes, you may, not promising that every comment will get to the point where it becomes something we discuss up here, but you may see before we vote, normally there's a nomination and a second, and then we say any questions or comments. That may be a good time for us to talk about public comment that we hear before we vote on agenda items. So just kind of wanted to give that reflection and that color. We're going to continue to solicit input from the community. We're going to still continue to talk about this amongst ourselves, but we wanted to kind of help people understand our goals here and what we're trying to do and help us with this process. So that said, I will go to the regular preamble. As we move into public comment, please come to the mic. Please address the board. You'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. This, I think, hopefully the preamble I gave gives more understanding of why this isn't necessarily a question and answer session. You're giving us comment as we're discussing and thinking about our decisions that we're going to be making up here. So there won't be engagement or interaction there necessarily. So please address the board members please address the board, but not members individually. And also start off with stating your name and as much of your address as you're comfortable with sharing. All right. So with that, I will entertain a motion to enter into the public comment, the first one that we have on our agenda. That's for agenda items. It's quick. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. The mic is there. It should be kind of here, but please feel free. I didn't mean for you to move it, Mike, but. Okay. Thanks. All right. Hope I didn't scare everybody off with that whole. But okay. All right. I don't see anybody making any movements. All right. Well, any movements from out there? Motion here on the dais. Moved. Second. All right. All in favor of closing our first public comment? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. Thanks, everybody. Okay. So now moving on to the action items in our agenda here. So we have this section 8, reports to the board from the business administrator, board secretary, letter A. We have under that I see, 4 items there. So I'll entertain a motion for approval of items 1 through 4. Second. Well, you guys fight over it later. All right. Any questions or comments about these items? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Next, moving on, letter or number 9. Under this one, we have letters. Let's see. 8. Yeah. Just A. I'm sorry. You're right. Okay. From the HIB self-assessment presentation. So, motion to approve this. Okay. Any comments, questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. Moving on to B, the student safety data system report for period 2. Motion to approve this. Thank you. Thank you, Claudine. All right. Any comments, questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed, abstentions? Okay, moving on to C, the policies and procedures. We have the ones that were listed that Dr. Snyder talked about for first reading. Under second reading, policy 143. Do you want, well, once we put the motion out, we can talk about the language change there. And then the motion, or I'm sorry, number 3 for the policy to be abolished. So I'll entertain a motion for approval of items 1 through 3. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, comments, questions?
I think it was brought to our attention, if you are on the exhibits, number 23-91, at the bottom where it is the second, considering candidates who expressed an interest in vacancy. 2, the question was, should it say, include the names of candidates to be considered for the vacancy in the public notice for the board meetings in which? So should in be there? Just brought to my attention. That's it. Okay.
Board meeting, which nominations will be accepted. So it just sounded like there's already been a distinction that they're not all being accepted, that in which it was just qualifying that those nominations are happening at the meeting. It just read awkwardly to me and it didn't seem clear.
So the nominate, it's happening at the meeting. Right. So the intent is that it's the nominations that are at the meeting. They're not before, they're
Right.
at the public meeting. So I don't have that. I'm trying to get to that.
So
exhibit.
just
It says in
totally just a
which-
technical OCD grammar thing. It should probably say in which nominations will be accepted, just to make it clear about what's
That's-
happening
It's,
there.
that's a benign change. It doesn't change the intent.
Yep. Correct. Yep.
We already have a motion. Do we have to do another one for as amended? Dr. Snyder? Ms. Leon? Oh, Melissa. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, easy enough. We had a nice little ELA assessment for the board.
So Jill, it's just putting, right now it says, include the names of candidates to be considered for the vacancy in the public notice for the board meeting which nominations will be accepted. It should be in which, because it reads, it could be interpreted that the nominations are being decided versus all of them being, Jim, does that make sense? Grammatically, it should be in which. Before, I was confused about what was actually happening in the meeting, the way what the policy was stating, the way it reads here.
So through Mick, does this change anything with first and second reading if we're changing something? Okay, okay. I just want to make sure we're not going to be more delayed on this adoption. Okay.
Every meeting now. Okay. Are we, you good to move forward or any other questions? Okay. All right, I will call the vote then, please. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. All right, letter D of number 1, homeless placements. Entertain a motion to approve this item. Thank you. All in favor, comments, questions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed, abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to letter E, numbers 1 through 9. Okay, entertain a motion to approve these items. Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed, abstentions?
I'm gonna abstain since I'm on the list.
1E, E1, sorry,
Yeah,
travel
E1.
expenditures, right?
Yeah.
I'm abstaining as well, James.
So 2 abstentions from number 1. Okay, but I think, yeah, we had all in favor and any opposed. Okay, that motion carries. All right, letter F, employee relations, numbers 1 through 14. And I'll entertain a motion for approval of these. Thank you. Any comments or questions?
I just had a question about number 8. And I'm sure it was in there and I just didn't see it, but I'm not clear. What did the amendment actually change? The shared services. Where am I here? Am I ahead of you?
No, you're behind.
How am I behind? Okay, sorry, my bad.
To give you
Oh.
background on that.
That's from the previous one.
That's an annual approval related to the transportation services that we provide for Blackwood Township. They own their own bus, but we actually provide the staffing. So that's an annual approval with an increase of cost.
That's the increase. Okay, thanks, James.
So we're, any other comments or questions on letter F, employee relations? All right, roll call vote, please, Mr. Heiser?
Dr. Alberti,
Yes.
Mrs. Arcaro Burns, Mrs. Fallows Macaluso, Mrs. McCopolis, Mrs. Morano, Ms. Romano, Mr. Villanueva, Dr. Snyder, Mr. Weeks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. All right, motion carries. Let's see, the next 2 are, oh, I'm sorry, suspensions. Just take any action on that. And then the information only section about enrollment information. All right, moving on to old business. Is there any old business to present? No? Any new business at this point? Okay, hearing none. Brings us to our second public comment. Promise I won't preamble as long on this one, but thinking about this one, okay. So this one is open public comment. And this one is intended for people to comment on things that are not necessarily on the agenda, things that are on your mind. Similar to the other one, you don't have to wait till here to tell us. We certainly would welcome any opportunity to hear what you might have to share. Some of the advantages to doing it in another place. One, we may be able to start more of a dialogue if it's sent through email potentially. If it's something that's specific to maybe you or your student, there have been instances where people have sent in something and Mr. Volpe is able to direct you to the appropriate person in the administration who can help you deal with that. So here though, the public comment, again, we'll be listening for themes, for common concerns. And we could take opportunity during our, for the good of the order section, which follows public comment. It may or may not be something that if we can address it easily, we may do it there. If not, we may just kind of allude to how a follow-up may happen. We may speak in for the good of the order to something that came from public comment last time. So just want to kind of give a sense of how we're looking at that, how we want the public to understand that, and try to improve it going forward. So that said, same rules apply. Come to the mic, up to 3 minutes. Name as much of your address as you're comfortable with, addressing the board in general, not specific members. So that said, I will entertain a motion for public comment. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Our second public comment period is open.
My name is Kim Warren, and I'm a teacher at the high school. We would like to recognize the Into Reading pilot committee members at Baker, South Valley Roberts, and the UES. They dedicated a ton of time to the adoption of the series and then shared their knowledge with other staff members. Thank you for always supporting your colleagues.
Hi, Dina Sakali, a teacher at Roberts School. I'd like to give a shout out to the high school guidance secretaries who served well above their duties to support their MEA colleagues during a stressful administration of testing. They directly fielded questions and concerns for all staff members. They maintained a calm, organized environment for staff to seek solutions, and we appreciate them. And I don't know if I said guidance secretaries. I think I left them. Guidance.
Hi, I'm Becky Condadina, occupational therapist for the district. I'd like to share that representatives from the organization A Long Talk spent the day at WAMS on Tuesday, October 11th. We had some great conversations throughout the day. We are proud that the district is making inclusivity a priority and that there's so many people here that are interested in being part of the process.
Mr. Trapani. I would like to just talk a little bit about the theme of recognition. This has come up, I guess, on social media and was sent to me from a few community members. There are many ways that the board can recognize staff. The first and most important for staff is through compensation. That is the universal way that all work is recognized by settling a fair contract and doing it before the end of the school year. The board could also recognize a grade level, a department, a support group for their dedication and service to this district. I have many other ideas about how the staff can be recognized. I'm available to discuss any of them. A trip to Trenton or to Washington, D.C. is not how to recognize staff members for all of their hard work and dedication to this district. As is often the case, there is so much misinformation that circulates. Luckily, I am available to provide a correct point of view and information, and also the history.
All right. Any other comments? Well, thank you for those who provided your comment. I will entertain a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Second? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, moving on. Is there anything for the good of the order? And as I was alluding to before in this section, we certainly appreciate sharing of all of the accolades for our staff members, all the people that take care of our students and help within the district, and opportunity to have a conversation about how to recognize that. I think also, if the board at this time, anything anybody wants to suggest for the good of the order, to have a conversation among ourselves about other ideas about recognition. Be a good period now.
Nick, I'd like to address it. I really appreciate the last two board meetings, hearing from teachers coming and recognizing things going on in our buildings that we wouldn't necessarily learn about other than through, kind of social media or, kind of getting reports back from Mike. I think that this board has a responsibility to investigate all the opportunities that we have to recognize our staff. One of the things that I've personally done and talked to others about is seeing what other districts do have recognition programs or do work with the Department of Ed and their existing programs. Do we want to be Morristown, one of the top school districts, and not participate when other top school districts are doing so? Or do we not want to submit someone, really worthwhile opportunity for them to be recognized by the county and then by the state? So I think, reference to a trip or whatever, it's really not about that. It's investigating as a board our opportunity to look at other ways to also recognize our staff, which I think is very important.
I keep thinking about the difference between recognition and celebration. And I think that, since I've been on the board, we look for opportunities to celebrate. It's not so much about singling out as much as it is, not unlike the state of the district, report where we look for what are some of the highlights. And I think we all know, that we have a really strong staff here. And I think, part of what our yearning for this, conversation topic is about celebration, not just, putting a tag and recognizing. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thinking, building off of what Claudine said, and this being a responsibility of the board to investigate, what our responsibility is, and also what other schools are doing, data is very helpful. So I think there was a public comment about the point of view and the facts and data that are out there. Like, how do we pressure test the feelings of the broader teacher and staff community? How do we get input from everyone on how they like to be recognized? Is there a way for us to do that as a board? Because it is very personal, and the difference between recognition and celebration is very important. So I'm wondering, is there a way to get data from our community when we think, how do we look at other communities, what they're doing? What does our community want and need? And then what is our responsibility as a board versus Mike's responsibility as a superintendent? I see all these different inputs into how we move forward.
Sure. I think there are some good opportunities to have conversation, probably Dr. Alberti on the communications committee, in leadership. Yeah, in leadership, Mr. Snyder and I can maybe take up the invitation from the MEA to talk to them about their ideas. So I think we can gather input from lots of different places, kind of have the discussion in the communications committee, and kind of come back and talk amongst the board. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all. So actually, at this time, I would like to request a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing confidential personnel matters. We estimate that executive session will be approximately 60 minutes. Estimate that 60 minutes long, and action may be taken after our executive committee. So I'll entertain that motion right now. Thank you. Second. Any comments or questions about that? Okay. I'll comment that we'll adjourn back to the admin building for that. The live stream will indicate that we have gone to executive session. We will come back here for adjournment. So just want to make everybody aware of that. Okay. Any other comments, questions? All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you. We'll be back.